Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today's webcast, which is going to be all about productivity, which comes from having great company standards, more specifically CAD libraries today. So welcome. Let's just start with a little bit of housekeeping and intros. So first of all, my name's Scott Lidgy. I'm the Technical Solutions Team Manager here at Javelin Technologies. And so my team looks after all the different SOLIDWORKS products and how they all work together so nicely. During the session, at any time, please feel free to use the GoToWebinar panel and go to the questions section. And any questions you have along the way, pop them in there. At the end of the session, I'll try to get to all the questions. Some of them I'll take offline if necessary, and I'll get back to all of you, though, for sure. All right, so let's get things kicked off. Javelin, as most of you should already know, but we're more than just a software reseller. We are definitely a 3D partner for your companies. We look for all the great new 3D technologies that are out there and bring them to you guys. We also help in a lot of ways in streamlining processes, and I guess today's session is sort of in line with that. How can we be more productive with how we work? Also, manufacturing is a huge area for us today, and how we can leverage 3D technologies like additive manufacturing and some of our other CAM solutions and so on. But I think the most important area is the people, and that's you guys. Making sure that you guys are using the software, using the technologies that we provide the best that you can, and take full advantage of your investments. So with that, today's session, we're going to cover off these topics. We're going to just start with standard libraries, just the benefits of having standards. Some of you should already know this, but let's cover those off quickly. Then we'll go into how do you set up, more specifically inside PDM, how do you set up good custom libraries? One of the default ones that come with SOLIDWORKS is design library, so maybe we'll focus a bit on that one. Also, today we're going to talk about the SOLIDWORKS Toolbox. It's been around for years. There's a lot of benefits to it. It's had struggles in the past, but today there's no reason why everybody shouldn't be using Toolbox if you use standard fasteners. Then we're going to move into some administrative tweaks. So this is more on the PDM side again, but again, just how to maximize these standard libraries and get them just dialed in just right and get the most out of them. And then I thought I'd throw in one extra credit one, which is in 2018, SOLIDWORKS PDM introduced the new branch functionality and merge functionality. And so I'll show you just a nice way you can leverage that branch technology when it comes to maybe creating customs from a standard library component. So let's start with standards. Why do we want standards? It's quite simply, it gives us repeatable processes, gives us quality of our designs, right? Having a single source of the truth that we can depend on. From there, increased efficiency of our designers and engineers. Why are we having people try to remember where they drew that bracket last and which project is it in? If we have a nice centralized location that's searchable, it's going to make them far more efficient. In turn, what we want to be doing here is not only saving time, we want to save money. And that's done both through the savings of time, but also reducing errors. Using the wrong standard part, or using similar but different manufactured parts. Why are we ordering almost the same part from two different manufacturers? If we have a single source that we want the designers to work from, we're going to save a lot of cost there. This is a smaller one, but it's still an important one, especially for IT departments. They love it when we can go to them and say, you know what, we're going to save you tons of hard drive space. And again, just a simple fact of having the same bracket in every project adds up. If we can have it at one file in one location, huge drive space savings there. Then when we have PDM running with it, with our CAD standards, we have some great visibility and awareness. And what I mean by that is, at a moment's notice, we can pick one of those standard components and know every project that ever used that part and what version was it in. So that if something happens, like we have a warranty issue and we want to, notify customers that had these certain products, we can, because we have the awareness and visibility on that information. So all in all, it's all about saving money, saving time, and having peace of mind while we're working on our designs and products. So let's dig into some setup processes for just some custom libraries you guys may have. A lot of people have it maybe in a network folder, or this is one of the problems today, is that they'll have them in little stashes here and there on their local systems, on a hard drive somewhere. So let's talk about how we can bring that together and centralize it. This is really the process. It's more, the setup of such an environment. First thing is, let's talk about creating a folder inside PDM. The next step is, and this is a really good best practice, is create a librarian user. And you're going to see some of the benefits between this and even more so when we get to Toolbox. We have to set the security. You want to lock this information down. You don't want this to easily be changed because it is a standard. It shouldn't be quickly or easily modified accidentally. I mean, bringing in a co-op student, they might not know. So if we can lock this stuff down, you're going to be far better off. Create an appropriate PDM workflow. A standard isn't going to be handled the same way as a project. We don't probably have the same approval processes or checks or cross checks. Once we have all that set up, it's a simple matter of populating the folders with the files you need. All right, so let's take a look. I'm going to jump into a PDM environment here. And in my vault, you'll see I've got a library folder. All right, that's simply all you got to do. Create a folder. You'll notice that I've created some other subfolders in here, things like my design library. I have some other more custom just for myself, in this case, standard parts. I've got my templates, so your SOLIDWORKS templates, your BOM tables, anything that's a standard, put it into the PDM and manage it that way so that it's always up to date and everybody's working off the same information. And then we'll get into the toolbox data, which is my toolbox. All right, so let's say for standard components, I just created the library folder and maybe a couple of subfolders where I want to start sticking some files. That's done. Then it's more on the administrative side of things. Inside the PDM admin tool, so this is under the hood when you're setting up PDM. First thing you're going to want to do is create a library user, right? So it's quite simple. I just gave mine the name library with a login, a password. It just separates them from the admins, from the users, and there's a little more traceability when events are happening in the library. The library may be attached to groups too, that's fine. Then what you're going to want to do is start to set security levels. So if I go into my groups, the higher the level of you can go, the better, because you don't want to assign security to individual users necessarily. Do it at this level. So for example, my librarian is part of my administrator group because they have godlike access. They can do pretty much anything in my vault. So inside here, let's right click on that, go to the settings. A lot of information here about what they can and can't do, what they're going to see. But for us actually today, it's the permissions, right? So the important one is the folder permission. So if I go to my admins, they have access to everything. So we're good. If you want to be more specific, you could go to that librarian and give them just access to the library folder. So we could just go to here, libraries, and let them pretty much do anything in that library folder. If I go to another group though, like the designers, if I go to their folder permissions and take a look at the library folder, you'll see I've really limited what they can do in there. They can add some files maybe, they can read the content, but that's about it. They can't pull stuff out, they can't check out, they can't do a lot of these higher end functions that's going to modify the file. And so you would set those at the different levels. Up to you, how much access you give somebody like managers. Let's take a quick peek for myself here. I gave managers full rights, so if they need to get in there and change something, they could. Completely up to you. But that's an important step, is set the appropriate levels of access you want to give people to your libraries. From there, you want to think about a workflow. You could have different levels of complexity for your workflows inside of a library. So for mine, for example, it's pretty simple, but I think that covers most people's situations where, when I put something in the library, I expect it to be sort of accessible and sits in library mode, right? But you can see some of my transitions here. If I need to transition and say I need to actually modify this, maybe we have a workflow for that says, a manager can push it from through this transition into a work in progress. And now maybe a designer will take over and make those changes. He can submit it for a change approval, and then the manager could approve that, which sticks it back into a library mode, and then again restricts access to the designer. There might be library components that you don't use anymore, but you don't necessarily want to delete. I mean, I tend not to want to delete stuff. I want to keep the history as best I can. So why not have another transition where a manager or the librarian could push it through, make obsolete? So now it's hidden from most, but we still have it in the vault somewhere. All right, so that's just one example. The other thing you might want to think about, we'll dig in this a little bit later, but my design workflow. You know, maybe you're designing a new project and all of a sudden you decide that, hey, this part is going to become a standard and I want to take it out of that project folder and push it into my library. I'll show you how easy that can be, but we need to get it out of my standard design workflow and push it into my library so you can see that any approved document, a manager or somebody or the librarian would have the ability to, again, transition it into my library workflow just through a nice little transition there. Okay. So that's basically the setup. Once you have all that stuff in there, it's more or less literally a drag and drop function. So for example, if we go down to one of my projects here that I have underway, we've got a lot of CAD files in here. And then let's say that one of these documents that we have here, let's take a peek at it. That's a good one. Let's say that's going to be a new standard for me. You know, if I have the rights to and just move in a file over the library, I'll just drag and drop it in there. Nice thing about PDM, all my references were maintained for the project, but now inside the library is my new file that we can now say, you know, this is going to be now a standard. Now that nice transition I gave my workflow was that if I right click here and I go to change state, I can make it a standard. So this is what's going to hop it from my design workflow into my library workflow, which now you can see not only is it an approved document, but it's been switched now to library state, right? And then now it's going to follow that new workflow if a design change is required for it. All right, so that's basically the nice setup for standard or custom parts that you guys may have. Bring them together, set the security, set the workflow, and populate. Let's talk about Toolbox. As most of you should know, Toolbox is available to all SOLIDWORKS Professional and Premium customers. Issues that it's had, a lot of people stopped using it a few years ago, and the main issues were there were some database problems, admittedly. You know, wasn't supported by PDM systems. Even back in the old work group days, it really wasn't supported there. It was kept in a separate location. So, it just wasn't adopted that well when it comes to PDM. Another big hindrance to it was limited customization. You know, a lot of customers wanted to put metadata on it, part numbers, your own naming conventions for the file names and the configuration names and so on. That was an issue. And then probably the biggest issue was actually user-driven, and it was the setup. If I was just a single user of SOLIDWORKS working on my basement and I installed SOLIDWORKS, I would probably never have an issue with Toolbox. As soon as you bring in a whole team, so you've got multiple users, there's some tips or some best practices on how to set that Toolbox up, and the majority of people didn't do it. You know, how to centralize it, how to make sure and maintain that centralized location, and how do you get all the users pointing to it properly? All right, so those were the issues we had. All right, those are gone in my books. The database issues, they changed the database, they changed where the data is kept. A lot of the data that we were accessing where we had problems, they're now actually in the files themselves. They're not being kept in the database. So we've eliminated those issues. It's supported by PDM. So both PDM Standard and PDM Professional both support and manage the Toolbox libraries. Customizable. So for quite a few releases now, it's actually been very easy to customize. We can put on those, we can change the names, we can put on extra metadata like material or manufacturer and so on. And the setup, is really easy when you've got PDM, because PDM is our way to centralize and give a single source for this data. So let's take a look. So in the Toolbox setup, first thing you're going to do is, again, you're going to create that folder inside your library folder, I would suggest, and you're going to just simply drag and drop from the default, probably C:\\SOLIDWORKS data folder, drop it right in here. Okay, check it all in by the librarian, and then it's just some minor tweaks in the setup again. So if we go back out to the admin tool, where those settings are located is under the SOLIDWORKS node, and you'll see Toolbox here. Right, so just working your way down, just simply check the box saying, yes, I'd like my PDM to manage my toolbox. My best practice, and I was suggesting to all of you, is use that library user, because what happens is this will eliminate anybody getting locked out when you're trying to create configurations when you're using or creating new sizes. So in the background, librarian is checking out the database, making the changes, and checking in without you having to deal with it. Makes it very easy. Just point it to where you've put that toolbox inside the vault. This is nice. This is a nice option to turn on search subfolders. This is more for when you're migrating legacy data from some shared drive, dropping it in. It's always going to make sure it's re-referencing toolbox parts to our toolbox, not creating copied project-specific ones. All right. I wouldn't suggest you change this. You want to lock the clients out, make sure that everybody's always looking to this toolbox for all settings. And that's it. Once you've done that little 4 steps, I think it was in there in the dialog, that's all it takes to set up PDM. The one final settings on the client side, and mine's already set up, so you're not going to see it. But the first time somebody starts SOLIDWORKS and you've made this switch, it's going to actually know that, oh, you've got PDM running and your toolbox is in here, it's being managed. Would you like to reroute your SOLIDWORKS to look at that toolbox? And you simply say yes. All right. If you're doing admin images, you can force that beforehand, so the client doesn't have to, or the end user doesn't have to choose anything. But where you're going to see this is here under the whole wizard / toolbox settings. It's going to re-reference that there. Okay, so it's as simple as that. Those settings are done. Now your toolbox is being pulled from the PDM environment, and which is nice because it's actually local, right? It's on your local cache that it's referencing. So great performance, great speed there. While we're in here, let's just talk about, let's get rid of the idea that, there's limitations to Toolbox. If we go into, let's actually go this way a little quicker. We'll just go to Toolbox Settings. Now, hey, there's a good note to take a look at, right? Database is being managed by SOLIDWORKS, and you need to check this out. Now, as a manager, I might have access to that, so I'll be fine, but a general user will be locked out. He couldn't do that. I have to be logged in as the librarian or a manager in my case, right? So it's checked it out in the background, and now I can start to dig into my toolbox settings, and you'll notice that, let's go into and see metric here. And we'll choose one of these fasteners. So choose the fasteners you want to modify. And you'll notice that, we can allow custom configuration names. It was added a few releases back. So that allowed me to change the configuration name, and that's typically what gets pulled up in a BOM. So you can create your own naming conventions there. They also added in other fields that were most common, obviously, like part numbers, descriptions, and comments. And then again, back in bills and materials, we can choose whether we're pulling those data fields or not. You can also put your own custom ones in. So you'll notice up here, I've added in material and manufacturer. So if we pick one of the manufacturer, for example, you can choose how it behaves. Is it a list, or is it a text box that somebody types in? So I put a list for my common manufacturers for those, right? And there'll be a drop down that the customer can choose, or sorry, that the end user can choose when they're designing. The materials because you have, you know, the similar bolt in different materials. This one as well, if I go back in, you'll see that you can actually link this to the SOLIDWORKS material. So the drop down here is looking at my SOLIDWORKS material library, but I can give it a more common name. I'd rather see it as in the file property. So you're kind of doing two steps. It's applying an actual SOLIDWORKS material, and we're getting a metadata field for my whatever, title blocks, bombs, and so on. All right, and then whether, you know, these could be common between different fasteners, so you can say enable or disable for that fastener. And do they need to be configuration specific? All right, so a lot of options there. Once you go through it once, it's done. Now you've got your very custom toolbox that meets your needs. Let's just close all that down. You can see that it went back in, and the PDM kicked in and checked that database back into the system so that everybody would be up to date. So just a quick recap on that one. To set up your toolbox, it's a simple drag and drop the SOLIDWORKS data folder into the PDM library folder. Configure the admin tool to manage the toolbox. It's a simple toolbox node, which is under the tool. It's the SOLIDWORKS node now in 2018. And then just ensure that the clients are pointing to that PDM, which should be pretty much automatic. Like I said, SOLIDWORKS is, even if they said no the first time, every time they start, it's always going to want you to point to that PDM location. So some other admin tweaks to maximize this a little farther. So copy tree settings. So having a standardized library, copy tree is a great way when you want to do similar but different projects inside PDM. But there's a nice benefit here that when we've got a designated library, we don't want to copy those ever, right? We want to always be referencing back to the standards, to the library. So I'll show you where you can set that up. So back inside the admin tool, again, this would be group specific or user specific. If I go into, let's say, the designers again, down at the bottom, we've got the copy tree. And if I select my library folder, there's a box at the bottom that says exclude from the copy tree function. So that just means that when I do a copy tree, anything within this folder, it does not want to copy. It wants to maintain the reference there. So let's take a look at how that works. So, you know, we have a project here. And as you saw, I did a little drag and drop there earlier to put that file in the library. And there's a couple of other ones that are in this project that are already in the library. So if I do my copy tree function on this top level drawing, you know, it's going to take everything, but by default, it's not copying these items that are currently in my library. All right, so it just saves me having to think about it, which ones are standard, which components aren't, and I copy the rest as need be. Okay. Let's go back to the presentation. Next one, cache control. So as most of you should know, the way we work in a PDM system is we don't work from a server from the vault. We actually work in that local C drive cache, or your local hard, it doesn't have to be C, any location on your local computer. That's what gives us the best performance. It's what allows us to collaborate and work on the same projects at the same time. But again, because of that, if you want to make sure that any changes that might happen, especially a mobile user, somebody that picks up their laptops and walks away to do work, you want to make sure that your libraries are always up to date. So there's a nice little tweak here in your settings again on how to manage that cache that came out a few releases ago. Again, maybe we'll go to designers, and then down in their settings, we've got cache options. And if I select my library folder, I can turn on refresh the cache during login. So every time the user logs in, it immediately goes to that folder and does a get latest from everything, all right? And it shouldn't take too much time if it's doing it every time you log in, because it's not gonna get anything that isn't already there. I mean, it is only gonna get the stuff that's not already there. All right, everything that's existing will be fine. So it shouldn't be too much of a hit on the login time. Just as a note, in case people out there didn't know about these cache options, it's kind of also interesting that if you're in a very secure environment, there are times when you want to take that local cache and empty it, right? So on logout, You know, maybe you want the whole local cache to delete itself, right? So just food for thought. Let's accept that and go back here again. Last tweak is a search card. Doesn't take a long time to set up, but again, it's just making it easier and easier for the end user to find stuff in here quickly and easily. So first of all, you're going to create probably a search card in the admin environment. So, you know, here's a sample that I have. You know, just simply I've got the ability to search for file names, for description fields, for vendors, materials, and part numbers. Add as many as you want that are in your PDM system on all your data cards for the different file types. One small step though you want to make sure you do is under card dropdown, there's the default values. So what I put in here was a default value of search path, so search folder path to /libraries, so that anybody using this search card, it's not searching my whole vault or into projects. I want them to be specifically looking in my standards location. All right. So once that's set up, if we go back into my vault and try out that search card, right? If I do a search on Bolt, now it comes up with quite a few bolts, but you'll notice that they're all in the library, right? If you want to refine that by material, maybe I put in steel. It refines me down very quickly. I can get a preview of what these look like, if it's what I'm looking for. What's also really nice is, like I said, because we have a centralized location, I could go to where used, and it's going to show me every assembly, every drawing that ever used that part file. Okay, so it's just having great awareness on your documents. And the last tip for today is, you know, how to leverage branching. You know, we've got it's a great way to create a custom from your standards from your library. But what's really nice about it is it keeps a reference in the history. So that, you know, you'll always know that this part file originated from some standard in my library folder. It could be important. If you're not familiar with branch and merge, picture it something like this, where, you know, you've got that original file, but then at some point, as you're going through the versions of PDM, you might want to branch it off. You might want to create a copy of it, but know that it references back to that version, right? Start with a new idea. You know, maybe you're doing two ideas in tandem. And then, you know, we're going to maybe eventually merge one of those ideas back onto into the main line, right? So you're going to merge that in, and we're moving forward with this idea. But anytime, anywhere along the way here, we can branch off as many times as we want. So, you know, back here, maybe we branch that off as another new product, or maybe a library standard, right? So a lot of capability there. So just so you can see how that works, so this is only available in SOLIDWORKS 2018 Professional. If we go in here, we go, let's go into my library. All right, let's take one of those documents we moved in here and made it part of the library environment. We're just going to simply right click, and we're going to do a branch. It looks similar to the copy tree function, because there are a lot of similarities there. So I'm going to call this, you know, new part design for project ABC. It's just a naming. It's just a way to reference it. Okay, and then where are we going to put it? Well, maybe I'm using it for a project specific design. So we'll go into my project folder down here. And let's just put it here for now. So we'll select that folder. Now, if this is becoming a new part, potentially I probably want to give it a new part number. So I'll use my serialized numbering system inside PDM to turn that from this number to my latest. So it's issued a new name, and that's it. So we hit branch. You can put comments if you want, why are you doing this, and so it's in the history, has better tracking. We'll branch that off. So it simply copies the file over and checks it in. And if we were to go over to that project, there's that file. You know, we have visibility on that information. So we right click and go to associated branches. I can see, oh, okay, so it is branched, and I can always know that it came, where it came from. And if I ever decide that, you know what, we did a lot of great work on this part and it should be the new standard, I could always merge it, which will take it back and put it on top of the other part. Okay, so that's a neat way to take advantage of this new functionality when it comes to CAD standards. So that's about it for the session. And it looks like we're just right on time. Again, if you have any other questions, I'm going to go get to the question panel here and start answering away. If you have anything you want to reach out to me directly for, there's my email address. But thank you all for coming out. We had a great attendance today. So thanks again to everyone. And we'll see you in the next webcast.